Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. If this is your first time here, welcome. If this is your ninth time here, you're still welcome. After about 25 times, you're a lot less welcome, but you can still show up if you want. What we do, Shop Talk is basically a chat-driven, kind of a Q&A program. You have questions. We probably don't have answers. Anders has answers, though. He just doesn't tell anybody. And you're still welcome, Anders. You're actually on the exemption list for the Get Out of My House Club. So if you do have questions about data platform, anything interesting, drop it in chat. We'll talk about it. Otherwise, we do have two interesting and fantastic people over here. Directly to this direction is Mala. How you doing, Mala?
Doing well. Good evening, everyone. And hi, Anders. Been a while since we saw you.
And indirectly in kind of a slightly different direction, but if you go clockwise, you can eventually find him. Mike Christensen. How you doing, Mike?
Very well, thanks. Hello, everybody.
All right. So we've established the ground rules. We talked a little bit. Let's get started. First topic for tonight is, I'm going to do this in reverse order from show notes, just to show how cavalier we are about the whole thing. Microsoft Build starts tomorrow, so it's going to be live for the next few days. There will be a couple of days of online stuff. It's Build. This is one of the two major conferences for Microsoft to announce really cool stuff that they've been working on for the last 6 months or so. So there will probably be some really cool stuff that they'll talk about. I don't know what they're going to talk about, so I'm not going to say
There seems to be
anything.
a lot of buzz around it.
What's that, Mala?
So I said there's a lot of buzz around it. They're putting out all sorts of tweets and such, asking people, tempting people that something really cool is going to get announced.
And as Anders points out, yay, more feature incomplete products. Well, I mean, all you have to do is adopt the incomplete product, and then eventually they'll complete it unless they decide that, it is complete enough as it is, in which case it never gets updated again, like in-memory OLTP.
So, is Anders referencing? Are you all referencing the SQL Server 2022 key features that aren't really features yet?
Well, it kind of goes back. I mentioned in-memory OLTP, which was 2014. There's a lot of stuff. I'd say I definitely have experience of 2008, having stuff that was partially there, like the warehousing work. What was it? The metrics warehouse. I forget exactly what it was called, but that was a halfway completed project that was so halfway completed that you couldn't actually remove it once you enabled the thing. But you have other things like master data management. There are quite a few items in the box product that get a start and never really see past V1 effectively. Part of the problem is that it's a mindset, it seems, where we're going to put out a product, and if people like the product a lot, if they really adopt it, then we're going to fund more work into that product. If they don't like the product, then obviously we're not going to fund more work in it, which sounds reasonable until you realize that in a lot of cases, a large percentage of the population could say, I like the product, but I really need it to do more than what you've given me in what you consider an MVP for the product. A minimum viable product. So the problem ends up being, okay, you've given me this thing, but I can't use this thing because it's not complete enough yet. And then they take the telemetry from this and say, oh, well, nobody uses this thing, so obviously we shouldn't complete this thing. And you end up with that over and over and over. And then the features typically don't get dropped. They just kind of float. MDM actually did get dropped, so that was kind of an exception. Past V1, Marshall says, a lot of those don't even make it past 0.9 beta 2. I mean, yeah. I'm being kind with that with a description of MVP. And then there are other cases where, they put the thing out and there's just some crippling problem that prevents general use of it. StretchDB is the classic example of this. Of
Mhm.
let's put out a thing that kind of works, and then say, well, you have to pay so many thousands of dollars per month to store the data which is least useful for you, which is a bit backwards. Does Extended Events have a management UI on par with Profiler yet? Yes, it does, Solomon. I mean, it's been in the product since 2012. You might not like it as much as Profiler just because of muscle memory, but it is at least as good as Profiler, or rephrased, Profiler is a pretty crummy UI when you really think about it.
I thought about it only after Kevin said. Maybe this is true. Maybe I'm just used to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
neither one of them has a wonderful user experience, but Erin Stellato has done a lot of work in that space, even before she went to Microsoft working for the tools team. But back when she was just evangelizing extended events, pointing out, hey, in the same amount of time that it takes a person to do X in Profiler, you can do Y, you can do X in extended events in that much time or less, almost all the time. And so the click path is pretty close. That may not be exactly the same in terms of how you get to that point, but once you understand the extended events UI, it is reasonable. But still, yeah, neither one of them is fantastic. Flat out lie unless you live in the XE GUI. Yeah, but Anders, come on. If I took a person who's brand new to Profiler and I told them to do something, they'd have the same problem. I mean,
Mhm.
it's that you've got 15 to 20 years, call it 15 to 18 years of working in this Profiler, and you eventually sorted things out. Way more intuitive. I don't think so, because add 3 specific events for Profiler, especially when you dig into things like, I want to see exactly what the error message that this stored procedure is popping up. And now you have to dig in and figure out which of these events is actually related to the error message. And you're clicking and scrolling just like you would with extended events. It's not more intuitive. It's also more limiting in terms of how you can work with the thing, and kind of sort of knocks over servers a lot more often. So I don't believe that Profiler is more intuitive. I think you just have a decade more experience working with it than extended events. If you had 10 years of extended events actively working in it as much as Profiler, then the counter argument would be, well, the extended events UI is so much more intuitive. I don't think either one's particularly intuitive. I think they're both hideous. I think hideous might be pushing it too hard. Maybe I'm just going for the troll here, but both of them have a lot of difficulty in surfacing relevant information. Profiler hasn't gotten an update in a decade, it seems, and extended events tries to make things easier, but it doesn't really. The wizard works for very basic scenarios. It doesn't work for less basic scenarios. I mean, I'm being more critical of both of these products than what you would expect. Also, by the way, Anders, it was Flavor Aid. I will not have people slandering Kool-Aid on my stream. They drank Flavor Aid in Jim Jones's cult, and people keep talking Kool-Aid. It was not Kool-Aid. The Kool-Aid man did nothing wrong.
So that's a first, Kevin.
The Kool-Aid man did nothing wrong. Oh yeah. So
I won't laugh so hard.
I was gonna make that joke, Marshall, the CA. They can only afford America.
well, I mean, when Jim Jones was pocketing all the money, you gotta cut corners somewhere. That's also why they were in Guyana instead of someplace where like property values were higher. No offense to anybody in this stream who is in or from Guyana.
Yeah, well, the prices there are not low anymore.
So yeah, I am willing to accede that both UIs are bad. They could both be a lot better. And part of the problem is the complication of you have what 400 plus extended events at this point and growing. Each version of SQL Server adds more of these events. So trying to build something which is intuitive for humans and also is broad enough to capture the variety of what you can show is a challenge. I don't think it's a challenge I've succeeded at, but it's not something I would necessarily want to try my hand at. I'll put it that way.
Yeah,
Though it would be.
I've been.
So I like the session wizard and I like the watch live data. Both of those things help me learn X events a lot better. So I can't say they are, the best of GUI that one can have. No, not at all. But they're helpful.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
with the 15 or 15, 20-year learning curve that profile us so much, you need some help. And it was helpful. Yeah.
I mean,
I've encountered some of that recently, where you just get so used to tools that you use, and I'm not used to dbeaver, and I'm not saying like I just trying to change the fonts and whatever, and there's so many options. I'm like, this is overwhelming. Like, I don't think
Right.
it's doing what I want it to
Do
do.
you know, as a data studio now has an SSMS mode because people are so used to SSMS.
Mm.
So if
no.
it looks like SSMS, chances are they're going to adopt it a teeny bit more.
So what does SSMS mode do?
It's a visual thing. Let me see if I can show you. Give me a few minutes. I don't have it on mine because I'm kind of determined to keep it the old way, keep it the way it is. But it's
That's
a
fair.
setting. It's a visual setting that you can keep.
Yeah, it's interesting. But then, like Kevin said, I don't have like I wouldn't necessarily be able to like tell them a better way to do it, or have the interest in doing that. Like, I'm not a UI expert. I just want to find what I need and move on.
Right. So Marshall says I kept using Query Analyzer far longer than most. It moved over to SSMS. I liked how lightweight it was compared to SSMS, but I finally migrated. So I never really got into Query Analyzer or the other management tool because I got started with SQL Server 2005. So I avoided having to transition over from that tool. And Management Studio has been good to me. Granted, today I probably work more in Azure Data Studio than I do in Management Studio, but both of them are up and running regularly. Stream Insight. Stream Insight didn't live for very long. Maybe there wasn't much use for it, but I do remember hyping it up a lot. So I got to share my screen for a moment because I did a quick Google search for this. And the article was, what is Stream Insight and why does it matter? And I guess the answer is it doesn't. But
10,000 reads.
yeah, first published in 2010. So SQL Server 2008 R2, new component in there. I vaguely recalled the name Stream Insight, but I couldn't remember what it was. Enterprise Manager. Yeah, that was the other tool in SQL Server 2000. I knew people who had it installed in my first job, but I had never installed it myself. So just kind of curious scrolling through this. It looks like, okay, complex event processing, which makes it feel like service broker, except trying to be more with event driven and architecture. So okay, yeah, this feels a lot like you say, well, you've got service broker, but then we're going to do something more with it. And So Solomon found this on Stream Insight, building the Internet of Things. Well, that's its first problem. Let me be the first person on this stream today to complain about the Internet of Things and how awful that it is in general. But hello, welcome, get off my lawn. So an article from 2012 about Internet of Things. I mean, that is a few years early. They're a few years ahead of the curve in terms of bad ideas.
I don't know why your humor gets me, but.
And the answer to who peed in my Wheaties is nobody. I'm actually in a great mood. I'm just having fun here. Just in case anybody was wondering. So Enterprise Manager paired with Query Analyzer, and I stayed out of EM as much as possible. That makes sense when you're doing mostly query development as opposed to administrative tasks. They combined together to create SSMS. Yes, it was very much like the Wonder Twins. Dashboards for SQL in Outlook. Anders, you have given me Lotus Notes vibes, and I don't want that. I have a friend of mine who was an architect at my first job, and his philosophy was you can build anything in Lotus Notes, literally anything in Lotus Notes, and I believe he was determined to show the world that you could build anything in Lotus Notes. He was a consultant building Lotus Notes apps for a while, and had built some stuff that I was impressed in a way that is almost please never tell me about this again type of thing. And it was like, oh, you could build this. Why do I need an email tool? Lotus Notes is there. Like, okay, Lotus Notes does email. That's fine. Why do I need a calculator? I can build that in Lotus Notes. Like, well, there's a calculator app. No. We're going to do it in Lotus Notes. Why do I need an ERP system? I'll just build that in Lotus Notes. Like, well, you kind of need one because Lotus Notes, your database is a bunch of text files. Please stop hurting yourself. Let's see. Marshall worked at IBM during the Lotus Notes days. As far as I was concerned, it was a mildly more functional hyperdeck card system. Yeah, I don't really have a dog in the Lotus Notes fight. I just remembered it being a thing of beauty. How much he was how hard. What we would now say he was a Lotus Notes stan. That's the best way to put it. He was all in on the concept of Lotus Notes and just loved the thing. And I was like, I used Lotus Notes in college. I thought it was funny how they had the hieroglyphs when you typed letters. That's my experience with Lotus Notes. Also, I remember it not working very well. If you remember HyperCard from the old Apple and Mac days, I am vaguely aware of the name. But, did a lot of... So, Mike, you did a lot of Lotus Notes development.
Well, development in that, the GUI on the front end, like I would create databases for business processes, but I wasn't a DBA for it or anything.
Okay. Yeah, there wasn't much database to administer from my recollection. I thought it was basically a flat file database.
Well, you could make, in our instance, you could make like business process tools. The one thing I remember making was an adverse event tracking tool. So customer service agents could like log adverse events in it. So I don't know what the analogy would be today. Maybe Power Automate, or what's that new tool where you can make your own stuff?
Yeah, we're thinking like something like Power Apps.
Yeah, Power Apps.
Or Access.
Yeah, like an access form. Yeah, kind of like an access form, yeah.
Yep. That hot new part of the Office ecosystem. Okay, why make Stream Insight a part of SQL Server?
They still ship.
Yeah. Hey, Access. People made careers in Access. All right. It is all about processing data. Both Stream Insight and integration services deal with data flows. Okay. Batch processing of finite data sets. Yep. Continuously running queries. Okay, but then my question is, why would you not just use Service Broker if you wanted to live in SQL Server and process events? Is Data Center Edition, $60,000 per processor. Now, that number, I mean, processor is a very heavily loaded term, and we have to realize this was 2010, so core counts. It was all core counts. And 5,000 events per second. All right, well, that explains why you can't have nice things like Service Broker. Actually, a lot of Stream Insights, now that I'm looking through this, what it reminds me of is Azure SQL Database Edge, or Azure SQL Edge, and how they have integration with Stream Analytics. And so I can see that kind of concept working, but I guess there's a reason why Stream Insight is not something we ever think about anymore. So, rip Stream Insight. Licensing was based on processors prior to SQL Server 2012. You're right. On R2, it was either CAL based or proc based. 2012 changed it to core counts. So I guess that's a fair point. I had forgotten about that. But yeah, that changed to core count and how it basically kept a bunch of companies locked into SQL Server 2008 R2 beyond the point when Microsoft stopped supporting it. But it looks like this was... No. I'm looking to see when Stream Insight was actually deprecated. And I thought it was 2016, but maybe it wasn't. At core, far better prices. So I think it was more of the opposite. As core counts were increasing, when they switched to the core licensing in 2012 to that roughly $7,000 per core for Enterprise Edition, there were a lot of companies that said, my rates are going to go up as a result of this, so we're just going to stick with our existing licenses, especially because they had software assurance and they weren't paying $60,000 per processor every year. They had paid one time and were maintaining that license from like SQL Server 2000 days. And Microsoft said, we want to get more money, but we don't have Oracle's ability to vacuum money out of people's pockets. So we gotta find another way to get that cash. But yeah, those were wild and heady days. So I think that sums up what we're talking about with Microsoft Build. We'll see what comes out of it starting tomorrow. I'm sure that there will be some exciting announcements. I'm sure that there will be some stuff that will be in preview. I don't know if there's anything that's going to go from preview to GA. And if you want to be really cynical about it, there's a pretty good track record of being right. A lot of great announcements end up not being so great by the end of it. But there are some things that come out that eventually turn into really, really solid products. Like Query Store is a really good example of this. The first version of Query Store, considering that your monitoring engine could take down your server, kind of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But it has gotten so much better over the years that life is all AI all the time. I mean,
that's what I was gonna say, but I thought it would be redundant. AI.
We are definitely in that hype cycle. I don't know if I look forward to another AI winter, but I'm at least looking forward to like an AI fall. maybe an AI fall for a little while. That you don't need to put AI in everything, or I'm going to have Chat GPT read my email. I'm going to ask Chat GPT where my bus stop is. Just, use your eyes. Touch grass for a bit, kid. Um, I I am really I'm really going all in on Old Man Yells at Cloud today. Um, and for the record, I did touch grass. Not for a long time, but long enough. Long enough. So all AI all the time is probably. If they're truly serious about AI, they will have it write the keynote.
That's a good point.
I gotta workshop this joke a bit, because there is a joke somewhere about marketing departments and being artificially intelligent. I think this is the third AI and all the things in my lifetime. So you definitely had it in the 80s, prior to the AI winter, which I think is actually the second. That was technically the second AI winter. There was the first AI winter that happened late 50s, early 60s, somewhere around there. Then you have the second one, and then you had this big resurgence in about 2005 to 2012, as compute became much cheaper and you could suddenly throw a whole lot more processing power at a problem to solve it. And so definitely at least second time for you, Anders, and maybe the third time. There might have been a stretch in the 90s where they pushed that hard.
So that's a very good short. It's short. It's only about a half an hour chat between Patrick LeBlanc and Buck Woody on the blooming of AI Spring. It's not any Microsoft Kool-Aid. It's worth listening to. It
Okay.
really is. Buck actually has a knack of explaining things in a down-to-earth, very pragmatic manner, which is why I like his teaching a lot. So listen to it.
Yeah, I would recommend it. I mean, Buck definitely has a great way of telling stories and relating things. Fantastic at that job. And I'm not sure if I would agree or disagree with what he says. I haven't heard the podcast, so can't say for sure. But I do tend to be very limited AI, considering that artificial intelligence is kind of a job that I do a lot of, and was very well tied into my academic career. But I also tend to be pretty cynical about things, so maybe that's a reason. Wasn't Common Lisp made specifically for AI?
So that interview with Stephen Wolfram, that takes some patience to listen. I'm listening to it like 15 minutes to 20 minutes every day. It's a 4-hour interview with a brilliant scientist, but he talks in very layman terms, very easy conversational terms that people can relate to and understand. And I've been really enjoying listening to him a little bit on what the future is going to mean within evolving AI. That's a great uh, interview. I'm about halfway through it.
Okay.
I'm gonna check it out.
And he has a really involved article on Chat GPT too, like an extremely well written article, which is again very long but very detailed.
Yeah, I think we talked about that one in a prior episode of Shop Talk. I did use that as the basis of some of the discussion.
Oh,
So
okay.
that article I can recommend. I think it is definitely more in the pro side than I am about large language models, but good for reading up and understanding a bit more of how things work. So yeah, I
There
see.
is,
Oh,
go on, please.
all right. I see this AI all the things as a way of, I need to get some funding from investors and need to use hot topic of the day to get that. Just like how 2 years ago it was crypto all the things. Before that, it was IoT all the things. Before that, you have other hot topics that suddenly die out for the most part, when people realize that they're only about 5% as useful and effective as any of the hype ever mentioned.
Blockchain.
Blockchain, yeah, blockchain was in the crypto all the things, and that funding for that has dried up quite a bit for some strange reason, like banks going under or something. I don't know, but there seems to have been a switch over from, oh, well, our blockchain idea isn't going to work. Let's pivot to become an AI company. All right, so we have a question from chat. In your experience, what are some common challenges or considerations new users face when getting started with Azure SQL? Are there any specific best practices or resources you'd recommend to help someone new to Azure SQL succeed in their implementation and ongoing management of the database? Well, your question is driven Mala off, but I think it's a good one. So, all right. Mike, do you have any answers that you want to give?
Yeah, I actually recently did a talk because my role is helping data scientists get access to data and kind of reducing friction. And a lot of them are intimidated by SQL, even though they know super complicated R and Python and pandas and regression mathematics and all kinds of stuff, statistics. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of good tutorials in SQL, and I think that that I had one slide on kind of like you can learn with with some of the select from where you can get a lot of the way you need to for doing data science stuff, because you can bunch up your queries and then pull it into your tool of choice. And then, if you can go as deep as you want to, and of course, Azure is the question here, but, because the standards, some manufacturers, or not manufacturers, but companies adhere to the ANSI standard better or worse. You can learn on Code Academy, that's free. LinkedIn Learning, there's lots of great stuff out there. Even the books, what was a SQL, SQL Central, SQL Shack. There's a lot of great resources out of there, but for like a basic one, the Free Code Academy stuff on YouTube and freecodeacademy.com, those are great. I mean, they'll teach you SQL, and there are these great books that are like Learn SQL Visually. Those are good books, and then and then you'll get better at it over time. But it's good to use a book or those things, because then they'll shortcut you around some stuff that you have to figure out on the job. It took me years to know that order by is not really a good practice, because it's not deterministic and it slows queries down. So I rarely use it unless I need it. But it took me a long time to figure that out. But if you use these tutorials, they'll teach you a lot of stuff.
So specific to Azure SQL, there is a workshop that is put on. Buck Woody, Bob Ward, Anna Hoffman have put together this workshop.
That's the best one, yes.
Yeah, and this is the Git repo for it. They do have quite a few items in here where you can walk through the process. So it covers virtual machines in Azure. It covers Azure SQL Database as well as Azure SQL Managed Instance. So it hits your infrastructure as a service option in VMs. It hits your limited platform as a service in terms of Azure SQL Managed Instance. It's kind of a hybrid of PaaS and IaaS. And it hits your true platform as a service in Azure SQL Database. In all of those cases, I think this is a really good point for getting started. Understanding all of the options that are available to you in Azure SQL DB, especially, is going to be a bit of a challenge, because this is an area where everything expands. The product has expanded significantly over time. The good news is, if you're familiar with very recent versions of SQL Server 2019 or 2022, then most of the stuff that you see in Azure SQL Database is also on premises in those versions. And so much of what you would think of as this is how I administer a machine is familiar enough. But I have to say familiar enough, not totally familiar. Like, for example, a quick example from today, I was helping a client of mine restore a database across servers in Azure SQL DB. So they have a database on one server over here, they want it over here, and in classic SQL Server concepts, you would take database backup, restore database over here. It's not that easy to do in Azure SQL DB. However, there is a copy command, copy database from one instance to another instance, and behind the scenes, that copy restoration works. Those are some of the types of things that you don't necessarily know about just from having that SQL Server on-premises experience. And I think that's where this workshop does help out a bit. Also, there's a good amount that's available on Microsoft Learn. Considering that SQL DB and SQL Managed Instance are Microsoft flagship products, particularly in Azure, they've got a huge amount of content on the topic. Probably just about as much as they have on SQL Server itself. And that's a good starting point, I believe. Mala dropped a link in for Anna's videos, which are also fantastic. And I'd say those are probably where I would start with. And then as you're getting into the process a little bit further, then you'll learn a bit more like, do I need elastic pools, or do I need a single database? Do I need hyperscale or not? Do I need serverless or not? There are a lot of different options available within SQL database just in terms of getting this thing set up and figuring out the performance impact. That is an important thing as well. And to that extent, a data platform professional named Ritza Eskins had a whole series on trying out relative performance for different Azure SQL options. And I am going to see if I can find the entire series, because this article, I believe, was the last one. And so that was just a couple of months ago, where he was messing around with hyperscale serverless. And prior to that, here we go. This is the roundup. So this was a 10-part series, basically summarizing what his findings were for different performance tiers and getting a feeling for where that sweet spot is for each of the different options, whether it's standard or premium, D2 or vCore models, serverless or provisioned, et cetera, et cetera. So gives you a feeling there for relative performance between editions. And then SQL Managed Instance is essentially, I want platform as a service, but I have some things that SQL DB doesn't support, or I have a significantly large enough database that I can't do it in SQL DB, or I have a lot of cross-database connections that are not trivial to recreate. And so Managed Instance exists as kind of an in-between product where you don't have to manage as much of the product. So things like automated backups happen, but you can still manage running a SQL agent job or having cross-database queries operate. Cross-database queries in Azure SQL, by the way, are essentially use external tables. Use the equivalent of Polybase. And Anders, by the way, says friggin' Git. I'm not gonna let that one go because I agree.
You will get no debates on that one, Anders.
Yeah, there is no good alternative. However, Git is not a good alternative either. So
yeah, I was reading about alternatives the other day. There's a few, but they're not.
Some days it makes me rather sad that people have taken, made it very popular. Honestly, that's my gripe, is that we've accepted what it is, like there is no other way out. I don't like that very much, but whatever.
Yeah, I liked Mercurial back in the. I liked Mercurial. I thought it was a better.
Right.
Um,
And what Anders is saying, not everything needs source control. Yeah, very true. You need
yeah,
an event feedback, you need something going for a SQL Saturday, and you go to Git, like, really, hello? You know, I don't know. That's excessive. Yeah, that is true.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good place to store. Like if I have any type of scripts, um,
Uh-huh.
like democracy, Git is the worst except for everything else has been tried from time to time. I still think Mercurial was better.
I haven't tried what you say, what you mean, so I don't know. Kevin.
Yeah,
But
Mercurial was a
uh,
competitor right about the same time as Git, and I understand this is sort of VHS versus Betamax, except Betamax was definitely worse. I'm not gonna stand for this VHS slander. I just want to point out that Betamax did not really have better video quality. If you got the high-end VHS player and you got the appropriate tapes for VHS, yeah, the quality level was the same. And also, VHS allowed you to record for more than an hour. So if you recorded like a baseball game, because baseball was a thing that people watched back at that time, you didn't have to miss the second half of the game because your Betamax recorder ran out of tape. So, did I expect that we would go down Betamax rant time? No, no, I didn't. But this is shop talk. We go to
Go
strange
deep.
places. So yeah, not everything needs source control. I tend to agree with that. I may be a little more pro source control than most people, and I get the benefits of the old style of exclusive lock source control, like what SVN had, like what TFS had, but that sort of source control also didn't really work for more than two people.
mhm.
Serially connected Betamax recorders, nothing a good Raspberry Pi project couldn't handle. You know, you probably could do that. I would not be shocked if you were able to do that. I wouldn't do it, but then again, PDP-8s are the hot new thing, so someone's going to do it. Okay, so we talked Azure SQL. We managed to cover Flavor Aid. Yep, VHS and Beta, Git versus others. So just keep bringing them on. Yeah. We might start to hit controversial issues like tomato versus tomato.
So on how you can get as a data studio to look like SSMS.
Yes.
I tried the extension. Unfortunately, my as a data studio is all full of work related stuff now, and I cannot share a screen. So I'm really sorry, but I'll post the GitHub link to what they call extensions, so you can install it for yourself and see if you like it. That is the GitHub link. That is what gets it to look like look a little bit. I mean, I can't say it looks a lot like SSMS, a little bit. Uh, to help those learning impaired. What is it? But as a data studio is actually really cool. We must do a show entirely on that, Kevin, because I'm switched. I'm like almost 80% there, except when I need query store, uh, and it's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I probably won't check it out, but I'll have to say I no, I don't even have to say it. I just won't check it out. I'm okay with Azure Data Studio, but still, if you want to check out high colored queries, go for it. Tabs versus spaces. That's a tough world because I prefer tabs, but I now live in several languages which are almost spaces required, and so it's difficult. I prefer tabs, but my IDEs are set to spaces. It's like living in a
In the
foreign country. It's just
multiple. Okay, I was
everything's
looking there.
weird and backwards, but you kind of have to live
Mhm,
with it.
mhm.
So one last question. Can you share an example of performance optimization challenge you faced while working with Azure SQL databases? How do you diagnose issues and what do you do to improve that performance? Are there any specific Azure SQL features or tools to help you in the process? Anders actually is right. Extended events. So performance tuning of Azure SQL Database is going to be very similar to performance tuning of regular SQL Server. And what do I do when looking for performance tuning of regular SQL servers? Well, we've got Query Store, like I mentioned. Query Store is turned on for Azure SQL databases. We've got extended events where you can track things live. We have, of course, who is active, the greatest stored procedure ever. Sentry 1 definitely works with Azure SQL Database because at the end of the day, think of Azure SQL Database as very similar to SQL Server, but that there may be its own idiosyncrasies. So, when it comes to I have a query which is not performing well, in a lot of cases it's going to not perform well because you don't have appropriate indexing, or you should rewrite the query in a way that works better. You're trying to retrieve too much data for the operation that you're performing. Those sorts of things are consistent between the two products. Now, Azure SQL DB, if you have too low of a resource level, like if you're using the vCore model, you have one vCore and 8 gigs of RAM essentially, and you're trying to work on a terabyte database. Yeah, queries are going to perform poorly because you just don't have enough resources. That's still similar to I'm working with on-premises hardware. I will say that on-premises hardware can be better and faster than what is offered to you in Azure SQL Database. So if you're at that really high end, like if you're at the 4864 core, normal to me, a couple terabytes of RAM is just buy that off the shelf, or I've got a half dozen NVMe drives that I have directly attached storage for every blade in my system. Yeah, Azure SQL DB is going to be a drop off performance wise. If it's regular small medium sized company type of hardware, then I would say even across the board, performance is going to be very similar hardware wise. Most of the performance things are the same, yes. And I do agree with Anders. Use the portal, see how your SKU is doing for limitations. So that's one of the areas where there can be a difference, and that is making sure that you're not hitting kind of that cap on what your performance level is allowing for and where they're throttling. So there are those third-party extensions or like Azure Health Monitor. So who is active is just a stored procedure that you would run on a database, just like SQL Server on premises. SQL Sentry Plan Explorer is a free third-party tool that is offered by SolarWinds. You install it on a computer and can connect to a SQL instance, whether that's SQL Server, Azure SQL DB, managed instance, and you can run queries and view execution plans effectively. Extended events are built into the product. Query Store built into the product. So all of that stuff is built into products, and also, frankly, is like it's SQL Server. It's not Azure SQL Database specific. And Anders has a link for relational database tuning, monitor and tune performance. Let's see what they say. Yeah, this seems reasonable. Monitor performance using Query Store, definitely. Establish a performance baseline and isolate problems. Yep. Look for bottlenecks. Yeah, this is specific for MI and DB. Excellent. So that is also going to be helpful in that regard. Now, I think some of this will also work on SQL Server on premises, but there probably are things that are specific to managed instances or specific to Azure SQL DB, like, hey, why is this thing not working well? Well, this DMV. Or go get Grant Fritchie's book. That book is, what is it, about 800 pages long?
720.
720. Okay, I rolled it up a little. round it up. But
If you want to learn more on managed instance, my dear friend Josephine Bush is having an excellent talk on it at 8KB that's happening on Wednesday. So check that out. It is, although the conference is a deep dive, her talk covers step by step migration to MI, and it's a really a good talk.
okay, excellent. So that's there are people that actually use managed instances. There are. Managed instance does feel like the halfway house for platform as a service, where I can't quite commit to Azure SQL Database, but I kind of want to. And uh, if you have specific needs, like I need SQL Agent, I need cross database querying, I need some of those other things that you can kind of do in Azure SQL DB, but not easily, then managed instance is okay. Performance is meh. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think you would get better performance working on IaaS, working on a VM of your own. You'll have a little bit more control. Now, it is better than it was before, where it used to take 12 to 36 hours to provision in an instance. That was painful times for Azure SQL MI, but it's gotten better. Oh yeah, it's way better. Yeah, it got better from the original days. I still believe it's probably not an ideal endpoint for most companies, but it's a halfway house. It's a place where you go between here and there. And so in the neutral connotation of the term, that's what SQL Managed Instance is. Lift and shift to a VM, redeveloped Azure SQL DB. That is also the more common. Yeah, that is a more common approach. Now, if you really want to get rid of IaaS for whatever reason, then SQL MI can be a route in between. But I do agree with you. If your plan is go to Azure SQL DB, lift and shift, then redevelop into Azure SQL DB, or if you can go straight into Azure SQL DB. That can be a little painful, really getting the data over, but they've worked on different approaches. Now, also with SQL Server 2022 and the link to managed DB, or excuse me, link to managed instance, there is a route in there to get moved into the cloud without having to do quite as much work. And then you could say, well, let me switch over to SQL DB from there. There's no control over patching. Correct. So if something awful breaks, then you don't really have control. You can't tell it when it's going to go down. You can give it hours where I'll allow patching during these hours, but ultimately it's not the type of system that you would want to have if you need 24/7 365 and suddenly, or they suddenly remove SP send DB mail with no warning. Or like Azure SQL DB suddenly removing CLR with no warning because it turns out that you could use that to cross boundaries that you shouldn't. So this does happen. That is a risk with using platform as a service. Platform as a service means you're relying on their platform. Infrastructure as a service, you're relying on their VMs, but you're still the ultimate owner of whatever you're running. And if you're really paranoid, run everything from your bunker and get one of those house-sized nuclear power plants, one of the micro plants, and our PaaS solution runs on IaaS. Everybody's PaaS solution runs on IaaS. Common language runtime, yes. SQL CLR. So Solomon says SQL CLR removed from Azure SQL DB with little warning due to no, that was never a real thing unless someone can prove it. My understanding, I don't know if anybody proved it. I know the rough statement was that you could get outside of your database's context because of something that was in SQL CLR. They also removed ML services for a similar reason, that you could see other databases. The concern that security was magically removed due to .NET 4.5 removing CAS. Oh no, this was a little different, Solomon. That was the on-premises weirdness with SQL Server 2017 and 2019, but CLR in SQL database, my recollection was it was removed due to the ability to hop over to someone else's database that was on the server that you shouldn't have known about and shouldn't have existed according to how everything's supposed to be logically separated. So in SQL Server on premises, Anders, it was changed to that new security model, which doesn't make sense because it doesn't actually solve anything, but adds an extra layer of complexity. I think I summarized Solomon's point on that one fairly well, and it's a point I agree with. Actually, I'm pretty sure that I might even be able to find the link to that article from Curated SQL. It solves one thing. It gets auditors off me. Okay. I mean, that is reasonable. That is reasonable. Here we go. Solomon has the SQL CLR versus SQL Server 2017. Here was one of those. So this is going from memory, so I could be wrong on it, Solomon. It could be that was why they nerfed ML services, and maybe CLR was the hysteria over CLR strict security. But I had a vague recollection that both were for the same reason. So dropped in link. Part 3 of Solomon's article. It looks like that was actually a 9-part series. You can get the whole set over on the right-hand bar. And I do recommend, reading that through if you want to dive into the common language runtime and about how Microsoft made a really unnecessary decision, which they didn't really need to do. But hey, at least it made me learn how to self-sign objects to make it work. Oh, it was the removal of CAS that supposedly allowed cross-database access. Is that what it was? Okay. All right. But yeah. I'm not going to say I have any inside knowledge on this, so I don't want to speculate. Mostly because if it turns out that I guess and I'm right, then somebody's going to be like, hey, this guy had inside knowledge. And no, I don't.
What does Solomon mean by it was never a real thing?
So the removal of CAS here. Let me drop you the link to the original article in the series. Solomon's got a whole series of blog posts on the topic, and but it looks like he's typing as well, so we'll wait for that. So that blog series, highly recommend it in the meantime. And actually there's a big quote right in the middle talking about CLR uses code access security in the .NET framework, which is no longer supported as a security boundary. And in 2017, database engine SP configure option called CLR strict security has been introduced. There's a bit of blah, blah, blah in here, but essentially saying that now in order to use CLR, to create an assembly, you've got to assign that assembly with a strong name key or a certificate. You have to create the asymmetric key or certificate in the master database. You have to create a login based on that asymmetric key or certificate and grant that login the unsafe assembly permission, which makes database administrators hurt on the inside because they see the word unsafe, don't understand exactly what it means, and immediately say, no, you can't do this because it would be unsafe. Again, naming matters. The overall security model for .NET and hence SQL CLR was removed in .NET 4.5. So the idea was that it is now possible to create assemblies with unsafe code and no way to restrict that. But in practice, that really wasn't the case. Yeah, there are some very unfortunate naming conventions. That was a really poor choice in 2005 because I know we've hashed this ground plenty of times on Shop Talk before, but the name unsafe makes sense if you are a .NET developer in the year 2003 to 2005. So, you're writing C# code. You came at this, you learned C, you learned C++, you know what pointers are, you know how dereferencing null pointers is a bad thing, it causes big problems, and .NET has this managed code and that it doesn't have pointers, it does all the memory management for you, and that's safe. And then you could write unsafe code if you need to have things be faster, you need to get past the garbage collector, and you've got to write code as fast as possible. And so in early .NET and in early C# and early VB.NET, they had blocks that you could call safe or unsafe. And that was essentially, was this managed code? Unsafe means I can have pointers. I could reference things that can end up being null. I can cause problems that cause serious crashes that are based entirely on my dumb behavior. And dumb is maybe a loaded term when you think about very complex systems and you pass around so many things. But think about a .NET app where we can catch a null pointer exception and keep rolling. And so that's part of the benefit of managed code. And they took that and put it over in the SQL people's laps and said, you can create CLR assemblies. They can be safe, which means they're managed. They can be unsafe, which means you can use pointers. Database people didn't know what that difference was and said, oh my gosh, it says unsafe. I'm not touching this unsafe code. How dare Microsoft put unsafe code in my database? So for a variety of reasons, I'm almost close to certain that the team misunderstood the SQL CLR implementation, didn't realize that .NET 4.5 and above in SQL Server did in fact still use CAS. I mean, I would not be shocked. I don't know who wrote the SQL CLR code originally, but that is, I'm pretty sure, a part of the code base that not many people touched, not many people would want to touch. It was something that sat there and worked and was pretty complex. So wouldn't shock me at all if this were the case. But on that note, I think we're going to have to wrap things up for tonight. So we are just past the hour and got to turn back into a pumpkin. So with that, remember tomorrow we have Kevin Chant, who's going to talk to us about KevOps, which is the next iteration of DevOps. You've got DevOps, you've got Data Ops, you've got ML Ops. Tomorrow we have KevOps. We no longer have Mike Ops. Mike had the drops. So that's the link. Come check us out. That's tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And until we see each other sometime in the future, everyone, take care.